A lost world of immense cities and forgotten empires once thrived across the Americas. This is the story of pre-Columbian America, a land of complex societies whose secrets have been buried for centuries. We are about to become explorers, uncovering everything from vanished metropolises and mysterious artifacts to controversial theories that rewrite human history. By the end of this journey, you will see the ancient past of this hemisphere in a completely new light. How did entire civilizations simply disappear from the jungle? What incredible engineering feats were achieved without the wheel? What is the one mystery you hope we uncover together? The conventional story taught for generations is a simple one, that the first Americans walked across a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska as the last ice age locked up vast amounts of water, exposing the seabed. This journey, we were told, happened around 13,000 years ago, but the ground is literally shifting beneath this long-held narrative. Archaeological sites are now telling a very different, far more complex story. In southern Chile, the site of Monte Verde reveals evidence of human habitation, with preserved wooden tools and hearths that dates back more than 14,000 years. To have people living that far south so long ago completely shatters the tidy timeline of a slow, single migration from the north. The mystery only deepens with discoveries like the footprints at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. There, ancient tracks pressed into the mud of a prehistoric lakebed have been dated to an astonishing 23,000 years ago. These are not the footprints of animals, but of humans, adults and children, traversing a landscape we thought was empty. If these dates hold, they confirm that people were living deep within the American continents at the very peak of the Ice Age, a time when massive glaciers should have made any journey from the north impossible. So how did they get there? This single question has sparked some of the most heated and fascinating debates in modern science. Some researchers propose that the first arrivals came not by land but by sea. The Solutrean hypothesis, for instance, suggests that ancient Europeans, skilled seafarers from what is now Spain and France, might have followed the edge of the ice sheets across the North Atlantic, eventually making landfall on the eastern shores of North America. This theory is highly controversial, but it highlights a growing willingness to consider transoceanic possibilities. Could other groups have island hopped across the vast Pacific, using currents and knowledge of the stars to reach the shores of South America long before the land bridge was even passable? These are no longer fringe ideas, but serious questions being investigated with new tools. The most powerful of these tools is genetic analysis. By sequencing the DNA from ancient skeletal remains, scientists can now trace the deep ancestral lineages of the first peoples. This genetic map does not point to a single migration event, but to multiple complex waves of people moving into the continents over thousands of years. It reveals a story of isolation, of meeting and mixing, of incredible journeys lost to time. The debate is far from settled, and every new discovery, from a cave in Brazil to a coastal site in California, adds another piece to this magnificent, sprawling puzzle. The arrival of the first Americans is no longer a simple chapter in a history book, but a dynamic, unfolding detective story, one that challenges our very understanding of human resilience and exploration. Deep in the humid jungles of the Mexican Gulf Coast, a civilization was awakening that would set the course for all of Mesoamerica. This was the world of the Olmec, a people so foundational they are often called the mother culture of the Americas. Their most enduring and enigmatic monuments are the colossal heads, 17 of them discovered to date, each one a masterpiece of ancient sculpture. Carved from single, gigantic blocks of basalt, these heads stand up to 10 feet tall and weigh many tons. Their faces are solemn and powerful, with full lips, broad noses, and wearing what appear to be protective helmets. They feel less like distant gods and more like portraits of specific, formidable individuals. But who were these people? Were they powerful rulers, immortalized in stone to command respect for generations? Could they have been deified ancestors watching over their people from the spirit world? Some scholars have even suggested they represent celebrated ball players, heroes of the ritual game that was central to Olmec life. The true identity of the faces in stone remains one of archaeology's most compelling silent questions. The mystery only deepens when you consider the sheer effort required to create them. The basalt used for these colossal heads did not come from the swampy lowlands where the Olmec cities like San Lorenzo and La Venta were built. It was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, dozens of miles away through treacherous terrain. Imagine the logistical nightmare of moving a stone block weighing 20 tons or more without the wheel, without pack animals, using only human muscle, rollers, and rafts. This was an epic feat of social organization and engineering, a testament to a society with a powerful ruling class capable of commanding vast labor forces. The Olmec were not simple villagers, they were master architects and artists, laying the ideological and cultural groundwork for everything that would follow. Then, around the year 400 before the Common Era, their major centers were systematically abandoned. The colossal heads were sometimes deliberately damaged and buried, as if to symbolically end their power. What caused this sudden decline? There is no evidence of a massive invasion. Theories point to environmental factors, perhaps shifts in river courses that crippled their agricultural base, or volcanic activity in the Tuxtlas that disrupted their trade and way of life. Internal rebellion is another possibility, a revolt against the ruling class that had demanded such backbreaking labor. Whatever the cause, the Olmec civilization faded from prominence. But their legacy was far from lost. Their concepts of sacred kingship, their ritual ball game, and their powerful imagery, particularly the recurring motif of the word jaguar, a fearsome blend of human and jungle predator, seeped into the fabric of subsequent cultures. The Maya, the Zapotec, the people of Teotihuacán, and even the Aztec would all build upon this Olmec foundation. They were the first to articulate a vision of civilization in the Americas, and their colossal heads still stand as silent, stoic guardians of that profound and mysterious beginning. Centuries after the Olmec faded, another metropolis rose that would dwarf all that came before it. Teotihuacán was a city of impossible scale and ambition, a place so grand that the Aztecs who discovered its empty ruins 1,000 years later believed it must have been built by gods. At its heart, the Pyramid of the Sun dominated the skyline, a man-made mountain of rubble and earth faced with stone, rising over 200 feet above the valley floor. Facing it stood the slightly smaller but more elegantly proportioned Pyramid of the Moon, anchoring the northern end of the city's grand ceremonial spine, the Avenue of the Dead. This was not a haphazard collection of temples, but a meticulously planned urban masterpiece, laid out on a grid so precise it seems to mirror celestial patterns. For the 100,000 people who called it home, this was the center of the known world. The city buzzed with a kind of ancient globalization. Distinct neighborhoods or barrios housed communities from across Mesoamerica, people speaking different languages and practicing their own crafts, from the Oaxacans with their distinctive gray pottery to the Veracruz traders. The walls of their apartment compounds, which could rise 3 stories high, were covered in brilliant, colorful murals depicting gods, goddesses, and scenes of a lush, watery paradise. This was a vibrant, multi-ethnic capital, a hub of commerce, religion, and power whose influence stretched for hundreds of miles. Then, around the middle of the 6th century, something went terribly wrong. The great city was systematically and deliberately burned. Its grand temples and palaces were set ablaze, the fires concentrated on the centers of political and religious authority along the Avenue of the Dead. After this conflagration, the city was abandoned, not gradually but with a sense of finality. Its people simply walked away, leaving their home to the elements. Why would a civilization at the peak of its power simply vanish? the lack of any deciphered written records from Teotihuacán means we are left with only the silent testimony of the ruins and the bones. One compelling theory points to a popular uprising. The sheer, targeted nature of the destruction suggests a revolt from within, a violent rejection of the ruling priestly class. Perhaps the people, burdened by the demands of maintaining such a colossal urban machine, finally turned on their leaders. Another leading suspect is climate. Ice core samples from distant glaciers and sediment records from local lakes tell a story of a catastrophic, decades-long drought that would have devastated the agricultural base that fed the massive population. A starving populace is a desperate one, and no amount of religious authority can command a sky that refuses to rain. Was it a combination of these factors, a perfect storm of social unrest and environmental collapse that brought the god city low? Without a Rosetta Stone for Teotihuacán, we may never know for certain. The city's true name, the stories of its kings, and the precise reason for its fall remain locked in the stones, a magnificent and haunting mystery on an epic scale. While Teotihuacán's fall echoed in a single, fiery catastrophe, the collapse of the Maya was a slower, more haunting unraveling. Across the lush lowlands of what is now Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico, the great city-states of the classic Maya period began to fail. One by one, the stone chisels fell silent in places like Tikal, Palenque, and Capon. The grand plazas where crowds once gathered for ceremonies were reclaimed by roots and vines, and the towering temples became mere perches for jungle birds. This was not an overnight disappearance, but a centuries-long process of decline, a vanishing act that remains one of history's most profound demographic puzzles. The scale of this collapse is almost incomprehensible. At its peak around the year 800, the Maya heartland was a tapestry of competing kingdoms, home to many millions of people. Within just a couple of centuries, that population had plummeted. The royal courts that commissioned stelae, the intricate calendars carved in stone, and the massive construction projects all simply ceased. The question is, what could cause such a sophisticated and widespread civilization to abandon its urban cores? The answer appears to be not one single villain, but a perfect storm of interconnected crises. Intense warfare seems to have been a major catalyst. This was not the ritualized, capture-oriented warfare of earlier times, but something far more destructive. Inscriptions from the period describe a shift towards total war, aimed at the annihilation of rival city-states. We see evidence of defeated royal families being captured and executed, and monuments of vanquished kings being deliberately defaced. This escalating conflict consumed vast resources, diverted labor from farming, and shattered the fragile political alliances that had maintained a balance of power for generations. The society was turning in on itself, consumed by its own rivalries. At the same time, the land itself was groaning under the weight of success. The Maya population had grown enormously, pushing their agricultural systems to the absolute limit. They were master engineers, creating raised fields in swamps and carving intricate terraces into hillsides. But there is a point where even the most ingenious farming cannot keep pace with so many mouths to feed. Deforestation to clear land for crops and to produce lime plaster for their monuments would have had a devastating secondary effect, altering the local climate and reducing rainfall through a process we now recognize as environmental feedback. And then the rain simply stopped. Scientific data from lake sediment cores and stalagmites in caves provides chillingly precise evidence. The Maya heartland was struck by a series of severe multi-decade droughts, periods of aridity so extreme they would have caused catastrophic crop failure. Imagine the desperation as reservoirs dried up and the intricate systems of water management designed for normal seasonal variation became useless. A society built on the worship of a rain god, Chak, was left pleading with a silent, empty sky. Famine, disease, and social unrest would have been the inevitable results. It is crucial to remember that the Maya people did not vanish from the earth. Their descendants are still there today, speaking Mayan languages and preserving rich cultural traditions. What collapsed was the political superstructure, the institution of kingship that claimed to intercede with the gods. When the kings could no longer bring rain, their divine authority evaporated. The people, in a slow but decisive exodus, simply walked away from the grand cities, migrating to the coasts or to more fertile highlands in search of survival. They left behind a landscape of silent stone, a civilization that had reached incredible intellectual heights, only to be brought low by a combination of war, overpopulation, and a climate that turned against them. The mystery of their collapse is not about where they went, but how a society so advanced could become so profoundly vulnerable. Far to the south, along the arid coast of Peru, another brilliant civilization faced its own reckoning. The Moch people were masters of their harsh environment, transforming desert valleys into lush, fertile fields with intricate networks of canals. Their cities were dominated by colossal adobe brick pyramids, the Huaca del Sol and the Huaca de la Luna, which rose from the plain like man-made mountains. The Moch were unparalleled artists, creating stunning gold and copper ornaments and crafting ceramic vessels so detailed they serve as a living portrait of their world. These pots depict everything from warriors and priests to fishermen and healers, even showing intimate scenes of daily life and vivid mythological tales. The true wealth and power of their rulers was spectacularly confirmed with the discovery of the Lord of Sipon tomb. This royal burial, untouched by looters, revealed a Moch king adorned in gold, silver, and copper regalia, surrounded by sacrificed attendants, guards, and even llamas. It was a new world equivalent to the tomb of Tutankhamun, a glittering snapshot of a society at its peak. Yet within a few generations, this vibrant culture fragmented and vanished. The great temples were abandoned, the intricate irrigation canals silted over, and the artistic traditions ceased. For a long time, the cause of their collapse was a profound enigma. The answer, it turns out, was written not in their artifacts, but in the very climate that had once sustained them. Scientific evidence from ice cores drilled in the Andes and sediment layers from nearby lakes tells a story of a climatic cataclysm. Around the year 600, the region was struck by a mega El Niño event, a dramatic warming of Pacific Ocean currents that lasted not for a single season but for decades. This phenomenon first brought torrential rains and catastrophic flooding that would have obliterated their carefully managed agricultural systems. Canals were washed away, fields were buried under mud, and adobe brick pyramids vulnerable to water began to melt back into the earth. This deluge was then followed by the opposite extreme, a crippling drought that may have lasted for 30 years. The life-giving rivers dried up and the desert reclaimed the land. How could a society built on the precise control of water survive such a violent and prolonged assault by the elements? The political and religious fallout would have been catastrophic. The Moch elite derived their authority from their perceived ability to intercede with the gods, to ensure the rains came and the sun shone. When their prayers failed and the skies delivered only chaos, their divine mandate would have evaporated. The people, facing starvation and seeing their leaders as powerless, likely lost faith entirely. Society seems to have fractured into smaller groups, some moving inland, others dispersing along the coast, abandoning the grand projects that had once defined their collective identity. The Moch collapse is a stark reminder of a civilization's profound vulnerability to the climate it depends on. A story of human ingenuity ultimately overwhelmed by the immense and unpredictable power of nature. Scattered across a vast, arid plateau in southern Peru lies one of archaeology's most visually stunning puzzles. The Nazca Lines are not just a few simple drawings, but hundreds of immense geoglyphs carved directly into the desert floor. These are not shallow scratches, but trenches dug to reveal the lighter-colored soil beneath the dark surface layer, creating stark white lines that form shapes spanning hundreds of feet. You find yourself standing before a perfect mile-long triangle, a colossal hummingbird with a beak like a spear, a sinuous monkey with a spiraling tail, and a spider so accurately rendered you can identify its species. The sheer scale is disorienting, the precision breathtaking. How did a people without flight, without sophisticated surveying tools, create art on a canvas so immense it can only be fully appreciated from the sky? The method, in its elegant simplicity, reveals their ingenuity. The Nazca artists simply removed the top few inches of rust-colored, sun-baked pebbles, exposing the pale, sandy soil underneath. The lines were then maintained by simply brushing away the relentless wind-blown dust. Their incredible preservation over 2,000 years is a gift of the unique climate, one of the driest places on Earth, where rain might fall for only 20 minutes in an entire decade. This near-total lack of erosion has kept these fragile artworks intact for millennia. For decades, their invisibility from the ground fueled speculation that they must have been landing strips for ancient astronauts, a theory that captures the imagination but crumbles under scientific scrutiny. There is no evidence of advanced technology, only the patient work of human hands. So what was their true purpose if not for extraterrestrial visitors? The leading theories point to a deep, spiritual connection with a harsh and demanding landscape. Many researchers believe these lines were sacred pathways, walked during ritual processions to plead with the gods for the most precious resource in the desert, water. The animal forms themselves, the hummingbird, the monkey, the orca, may represent spirits or constellations linked to rain and fertility. By walking these immense figures, the Nazca people were perhaps physically tracing prayers into the earth, activating a connection to the divine. Another compelling idea positions the lines as a giant astronomical calendar. Certain long lines and trapezoids align perfectly with the solstice sun, while others may point to important star clusters on the horizon, marking critical times for planting or ceremonial cycles in a world governed by the sky. The most profound clue, however, comes from the mountains that ring the plain. Recent discoveries of smaller, similar lines etched onto hillsides have transformed our understanding. These geoglyphs were clearly designed to be seen from the ground below, not just the air above. They were likely offerings to powerful mountain deities, whom the Nazca believed controlled the water that flowed down in seasonal rivers from the Andes. From the foothills, a community could look up and see their collective devotion displayed on the slopes, a permanent plea for life in a land of death. The Nazca Lines were not a message for the sky, but a profound conversation with it, a monumental expression of human hope etched with painstaking care into the very heart of the desert. Across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, a different kind of metropolis once reached for the sky. Cahokia was the beating heart of ancient North America, a city that at its peak around the year 1050 housed as many as 20,000 people, a population that rivaled London at the same time. Its skyline was not built of stone but of earth, dominated by the colossal Monk's Mound. This immense, flat-topped platform rises 100 feet high, covering 14 acres at its base, a man-made mountain constructed basket by basket of soil over generations. From its summit, a powerful ruler would have looked down upon a vast central plaza teeming with life, surrounded by over 120 smaller mounds that served as platforms for temples, elite residences, and burial sites. The society that built this was not egalitarian. Elaborate burials reveal a stark hierarchy, with some individuals interred on litters of thousands of shell beads and accompanied by sacrificed retainers, while others were laid to rest with far simpler goods. This was a place of immense power and profound social division, a cultural and religious hub that drew people from across the Mississippi Valley. Yet by the year 1350, this great city was completely abandoned, its earthworks left silent. What forces could cause such a flourishing capital to empty? The city's very success may have sown the seeds of its downfall. Supporting such a dense population required immense resources, and the surrounding forests were likely cleared for building materials and firewood, leading to soil erosion and siltation in the vital creeks. This resource depletion, coupled with possible social unrest from a burdened populace, created a fragile foundation. Then came the climate. Tree ring data reveals a period of sharply cooler temperatures and droughts beginning in the 1300s, a climatic shift that would have devastated the maize agriculture that fed the city. A hungry people cannot be ruled for long, and the authority of the chiefs who lived atop Monk's Mound would have evaporated as the rains failed. But Cahokia's legacy is not just one of collapse. Its people possessed a deep and sophisticated understanding of the cosmos, embodied in their woodhenge, a great circle of massive cedar posts that functioned as a solar calendar. A priest or astronomer standing at the center of this circle could watch the sun rise through specific posts, marking the equinoxes and solstices with perfect precision, timing the sacred ceremonies and agricultural cycles that held their world together. This was not a primitive society, but a complex one that charted the heavens from the banks of the Mississippi, leaving behind a silent, earthen mystery that still challenges our understanding of ancient America. High in the stark, sun-baked canyon lands of New Mexico, the great houses of Choco Canyon rise from the desert floor like ancient stone palaces. The most magnificent of them all, Pueblo Bonito, was a colossal multi-story complex with over 600 rooms arranged in a precise D-shaped curve. Its walls were built with an almost supernatural precision, thousands of finely shaped sandstone blocks laid without mortar, fitted together so perfectly that a knife blade cannot slip between them. This was not a haphazard village, but a monument of breathtaking architectural ambition, a central place that drew people from across a vast region. But what was the true purpose of this sprawling structure in the middle of such a harsh and remote landscape? The canyon itself seems an unlikely location for a major center of power. It has no permanent river, and farming would have been a constant struggle. Yet Pueblo Bonito and a dozen other great houses were clearly the heart of something immense. The evidence lies in the extraordinary road network that radiates out from the canyon. These were not mere trails worn by foot traffic, but engineered highways 30 feet wide and perfectly straight, carved directly into the desert. They plowed across the terrain, cutting through sandstone cliffs and marching over ridges without deviating, connecting Choco to outlying communities sometimes over 60 miles away. Why such immense effort for roads that, curiously, show little evidence of everyday travel, with no deep ruts from heavy carts? This suggests they were less for commerce and more for ceremony, sacred pathways for pilgrims journeying to the canyon for momentous events. The treasures found inside Pueblo Bonito confirm its central role in a vast, interconnected world. In its sealed rooms, archaeologists have found vivid scarlet macaw feathers from the rainforests of Central America and copper bells crafted in the sophisticated metalworking traditions of West Mexico. These were not practical goods, but items of immense ritual significance, symbols of prestige and spiritual power that connected the ancestral Pueblones to civilizations thousands of miles away. So was Choco a city. It lacks the dense, permanent residential population we associate with urban centers. This paradox fuels the great debate. Was it primarily a seasonal pilgrimage site, a kind of ancient Mecca that swelled with people during celestial events, only to be nearly empty for the rest of the year? Or was it a centralized storage and redistribution hub, where grain and goods from the wider region were managed by a powerful elite? The sheer scale of its construction hints at a society with a highly organized, perhaps even coercive, leadership capable of commanding labor on an epic scale. The mystery of its ultimate purpose may be less important than the reality of its influence, a spiritual and economic gravity that held the entire region in its orbit. That orbit, however, was shattered by a force no human authority could control. Tree rings from the region tell a story of a sudden, terrifying change. Around the year 1130, the rain simply stopped. What followed was not a typical dry spell, but a profound 50-year megadrought, one of the most severe in the entire history of the Southwest. In a land where survival was always balanced on a knife's edge, this was a death sentence. The carefully managed fields failed, the reservoirs dried up, and the delicate social contract that bound outlying communities to the canyon center frayed and then snapped. The great houses, symbols of a unified cultural world, were gradually, methodically abandoned. The people did not vanish, they migrated, carrying their knowledge and traditions to places with more reliable water, like the cliffs of Mesa Verde or the pueblos along the Rio Grande. Choco's empty stone rooms stand as a silent testament to a brilliant civilization that mastered architecture, astronomy, and trade, yet could not withstand the relentless, drying wind of a changing climate. The line between history and legend is often the most fertile ground for discovery. Centuries after the fall of Teotihuacán, a new name echoed through the highlands of Mexico, a name spoken with reverence and awe by the Aztecs who came later. They called them the Toltecs, and they described their capital, Tollan, as a city of unparalleled splendor. It was said to be a place where palaces were inlaid with precious stones, where artisans crafted feathers into living art, and where the very concept of civilization was perfected. For the Aztecs, to be called Toltec was the highest compliment, meaning a master artist or a sage. But did this Golden Age empire truly exist, or was it a brilliant fiction, a political myth conjured to justify power? The search for a real Tollan leads us to the archaeological site of Chala. Here, atop a windswept hill, stand the imposing ruins of a once great city. The most iconic remnants are the massive stone figures known as the Atlantean warriors. These 15-foot-tall columns, carved in the shape of stern, armed men, once supported the roof of a grand temple. They stand as silent sentinels, their feathered headdresses and spear throwers marking them as members of a powerful warrior class. Surrounding them are friezes of coiled serpents and processions of jaguars and eagles, symbols that would become central to the Aztec Empire centuries later. The connection seems compelling, yet Chala presents a puzzle. While it was certainly a significant regional capital, its scale and grandeur do not quite match the mythical descriptions of a city whose buildings were made of gold and turquoise. This gap between the archaeological record and the legendary accounts fuels a deep scholarly divide. One school of thought argues that the Toltecs were indeed a real, expansionist empire based at Chala, a state that wielded significant military and cultural influence across Mesoamerica. Their distinctive artistic style, featuring the feathered serpent and the chacmul, a reclining figure holding a sacrificial bowl, appears at sites as far away as Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, suggesting a powerful network of trade or even conquest. The opposing view suggests that the Toltecs were largely an ideological construct. According to this theory, the Aztecs, who saw themselves as crude newcomers, needed a glorious predecessor to legitimize their own rule. They essentially invented a golden age, a time of perfect kings and divine artisans, and pinned it to a real but less magnificent city like Chala to give their story a physical anchor. By claiming descent from the Toltecs, the Aztec emperors were wrapping themselves in a borrowed cloak of antiquity and legitimacy. At the heart of this debate lies one of Mesoamerica's most enduring figures, the god King Ciacatl Quetzalcoatl. The legends say he was a wise and pious ruler of Tollan, a priest of the peaceful feathered serpent god who opposed human sacrifice. His reign was a time of perfect harmony, but he was eventually overthrown by dark forces devoted to a bloodthirsty deity, Tezcatlipoca. Driven from his city, Quetzalcoatl departed to the east, vowing to return one day to reclaim his throne. This story was not just a folk tale, it was a historical force. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived on the eastern coast of Mexico in the exact year the prophecy predicted, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II was paralyzed with fear, wondering if this was the returning god king. The legend of Quetzalcoatl, whether based on a real Toltec ruler or entirely mythical, had directly shaped the course of history. So were the Toltecs a mighty empire or a brilliant political myth? The truth likely lies in the murky space between. There was probably a powerful kingdom centered at Chala, whose warriors and artists left a deep impression on their neighbors. But its memory was then polished and amplified over centuries, transformed by the Aztecs into a potent symbol of everything they aspired to be. The Toltecs, real or imagined, became the benchmark for civilization, a ghost of a golden age that would haunt the imaginations of Mesoamerican rulers for generations to come. Far to the west, in the desolate Taklamakan Desert of China, a discovery emerged that seemed to defy all logic. Here, in the scorching sands of the Tarim Basin, archaeologists unearthed a series of incredibly preserved mummies. Their faces were strikingly familiar, with high noses, deep-set eyes, and light-colored hair, their European-like features perfectly intact after 4,000 years. They were dressed in beautifully woven woolen textiles, some in brilliantly colored trousers and tunics, looking as if they had stepped out of a story from the ancient West. Their graves were stocked with the tools of their lives, baskets of grain, and even pieces of cheese, a poignant snapshot of a people frozen in time. Their presence posed a massive historical puzzle. How could individuals who looked so distinctly Western have been living in the heart of Central Asia a full 2 millennia before the famous Silk Road connected East and West? Were they lost travelers, a forgotten colony, or evidence of a vast, unknown migration? For decades, the mystery of their origins fueled intense speculation and debate, suggesting a previously unknown chapter of transcontinental contact. The answer, however, lay not in their artifacts but in their very bones. Advanced genetic sequencing finally cracked the case, revealing a truth far more profound than simple travelers from Europe. The DNA told a different story entirely. These people were not recent migrants from the West. They were the direct descendants of an ancient North Eurasian population, a group of hunter-gatherers who had once spanned the northern reaches of the continent during the last ice age. Isolated for millennia in this desert basin, they preserved their distinctive physical appearance and their unique culture, a living remnant of a world that had otherwise vanished. This revelation isolates one of the great enigmas of human movement, showing us that the map of the ancient world was populated by ghost lineages and isolated societies whose stories are written not in grand monuments, but in the silent, enduring code of our own selves. Stone itself seems to bend to the will of the Inca. High in the Andes, their stonemasons performed what appears to be magic, fitting gargantuan blocks of granite and limestone together in a seamless, interlocking jigsaw puzzle. At the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, walls are composed of stones weighing over 100 tons, each one shaped with such astonishing precision that not even the thinnest blade of steel can be inserted into the joints. This was not simply a matter of aesthetic perfection, it was a matter of survival. The Inca Empire was born in one of the most geologically active and treacherous mountain ranges on Earth, a land constantly shaken by earthquakes. Their polygonal masonry, where stones of every size and shape locked together without mortar, was a revolutionary form of anti-seismic engineering. When the ground trembles, a rigid wall of uniform blocks will crack and collapse. But an Inca wall, with its intricate, flexible joints, actually dances, the stones shifting and settling before clicking perfectly back into place once the quake has passed. This was architecture in dialogue with the land, a testament to a deep, hard-won understanding of the forces of nature. To bind their mountainous empire together, the Inca engineered the Teotihuacán, a road system spanning over 25,000 miles, a distance greater than the circumference of the entire Earth. This was no simple dirt path. It was a masterwork of infrastructure with stone-paved surfaces in deserts, staircases cut into sheer mountain cliffs, and suspension bridges woven from native grasses stretching across deep ravines. These roads were not for carts or wagons, as the Inca had no use for the wheel in such vertiginous terrain. Instead, they were the empire's circulatory system, and the messengers who ran them were its lifeblood. At regular intervals, way stations known as tambos provided shelter and supplies for official travelers. From these posts, the chasquis, a dedicated corps of relay runners, operated the fastest communication network in the pre-Columbian world. A message or a fresh batch of seafood from the coast could be carried from Quito to Cuzco, a journey of 1,200 miles, in under a week. One runner would sprint to the next tambo, his conch shell trumpet alerting his replacement, who would take the payload and immediately begin his own burst of speed. This was a system built on human endurance and impeccable organization, an information superhighway powered by foot. How did they administer such a vast and complex domain without a single line of written text? The answer lies in an elegant and mysterious technology of knotted cords called the quipu. Far more than simple counting tools, these intricate arrays of colored strings were a sophisticated data storage system. A trained administrator, known as a quipukamayok, could read the quipu like a book. The position of the knots, the colors of the cords, the type of spin in the yarn, and the sequence of everything together encoded vast amounts of information, from census data and tax records to inventories of storehouses, and even the rich tapestry of historical narratives and genealogies. It was a three-dimensional, tactile language of the state, a binary code of knots and spaces that allowed the Inca to see and manage their entire world. The ultimate mystery of the Inca, then, is not just how they moved mountains of stone, but how they achieved such breathtaking complexity without the technologies we often consider fundamental to civilization. They built an empire without the wheel, forged unity without a written script, and mastered the most formidable landscape on the continent through observation, adaptation, and the unparalleled power of organized human will. Perched on a razorback ridge between two soaring peaks, Machu Picchu feels like a city in the sky. It is a place of impossible beauty and profound mystery, a secret the Andes kept for 4 centuries. The story of its modern discovery begins with a young American explorer, Hiram Bingham, who was led up the precipitous slopes by local Quechua farmers in 1911. Pushing aside the cloud forest vines, he stumbled upon a breathtaking sight, a sprawling complex of exquisitely crafted stone buildings, terraces, and temples, all perfectly preserved yet utterly empty. He called it the Lost City of the Incas, a name that has captured the world's imagination ever since. But what was this magnificent place actually for? The most prominent theory suggests it was a luxurious royal estate, a country retreat for the great Emperor Pachacuti. The refined stonework of the so-called royal tomb and the elegant residential compounds support this idea, a place fit for an imperial court to escape the formalities of the capital, Cusco. Yet the sheer number of religious structures points to a purpose far greater than a simple getaway. At the heart of the complex stands the Temple of the Sun, a masterpiece of Inca masonry. Its curved wall and trapezoidal windows are aligned with breathtaking precision to capture the first rays of the sunrise during the June solstice, illuminating a sacred altar within. This was a direct connection to Inti, the sun god, the divine ancestor of the Inca emperor himself. Close by rests the Teotihuacán, the hitching post of the sun. This intricately carved granite pillar served as a sophisticated astronomical clock. During the equinoxes, the sun would position itself directly above the stone, casting no shadow, a moment when the Inca priests could symbolically tether the sun to the earth to prevent it from continuing its journey north and plunging the world into eternal winter. Every building, every window, and every stairway seems to have been placed with celestial intent, making the entire city a grand stone calendar oriented to the heavens. So was it a palace, a temple, or a university for astronomer priests? The most compelling answer is that it was all three. Its remote, defensible location high in the clouds provided both seclusion for sacred rituals and security for the elite. It was a self-contained world where political power, spiritual authority, and scientific knowledge converged. This convergence, however, was short-lived. The city was mysteriously abandoned around the time of the Spanish conquest in the 16th century, yet there is no evidence the conquistadors ever found it. It was not sacked or destroyed, it was simply left. The most likely explanation is that its inhabitants, perhaps the very priests and attendants who served the emperor, fled to join the final Inca resistance in the jungle lowlands of Vilcabamba, leaving their sacred city to be swallowed by the forest. Machu Picchu's greatest secret was not its location, but its purpose, a silent sanctuary where an emperor could walk with the gods until the world below fell into chaos. For centuries, the Amazon was seen as a green desert, a vast, untouched wilderness where only small, scattered tribes could survive. This long-held myth is now crumbling, replaced by a far more astonishing reality. Cutting through the jungle canopy, modern technology has revealed a lost world hidden in plain sight. Satellite photography and LiDAR, a laser-based surveying tool that can map the ground beneath the dense foliage, have uncovered the ghostly outlines of a once thriving civilization. The forest floor is etched with enormous geometric shapes, perfect circles and squares spanning hundreds of feet. These are the Inca geoglyphs, massive earthworks dug over 2,000 years ago. They were not fortifications, as there is no sign of warfare. Instead, they seem to be ceremonial centers, gathering places for a people who transformed their entire world. The scale of this transformation is almost beyond belief. The LiDAR maps show not just isolated symbols, but a sprawling network of roads connecting large, planned settlements. Some of these ancient towns were home to tens of thousands of people, rivaling the size of many medieval European cities. They were not simply carved out of the wild, but integrated into it through a revolutionary system of land management. These were the Amazon's true garden cities. The inhabitants practiced a form of advanced agroforestry, cultivating vast orchards of useful trees. They grew Brazil nuts, palm fruits, and other crops in a complex, layered system that mimicked the natural forest, creating a sustainable, long-term food supply that could support a huge, non-nomadic population. The most compelling evidence for this lost civilization lies in the very soil underfoot. Scattered across the Amazon basin are patches of incredibly rich, dark earth known as terra preta. Unlike the region's naturally thin, nutrient-poor soil, terra preta is dark, fertile, and packed with charcoal, pottery shards, and organic waste. This is not a natural phenomenon. It is an anthropogenic soil, meaning it was intentionally created by human hands. Ancient Amazonians developed a recipe for super soil, a process of slow burning and composting known as biochar. They enriched the earth for generations, turning barren ground into enduringly productive farmland. This was not accidental, it was a sophisticated, deliberate technology. What emerges is a portrait of a pre-Columbian Amazon that was not a pristine wilderness, but a managed, almost engineered landscape. It was a world of interconnected towns, linked by straight roads and unified by a shared understanding of how to live in harmony with the jungle. They did not simply live in the forest, they shaped it, cultivated it, and enriched it, creating a civilization that flourished for centuries. The great mystery is no longer whether complex societies existed here, but how they managed to build such a vast, green civilization, and why their story was so completely erased from history, leaving only their fertile black earth and geometric ghosts beneath the trees. The discovery of a 9,000-year-old skeleton along the banks of the Columbia River in Washington state ignited a firestorm that would burn for 2 decades. Known as Teotihuacán, the ancient remains became the center of a perfect storm, pitting science against faith and law against tradition. The initial physical analysis of the skull sent shockwaves through the public. Some anthropologists describe the features as Caucasoid, a now outdated term that led to sensational and misleading headlines about a mysterious white race inhabiting ancient America. These claims, though quickly contested within scientific circles, tapped into deep and painful currents of history and identity. For many, it seemed like science was being used once again to question the deep ancestral roots of native peoples in their own land. This scientific controversy immediately collided with the law. 5 Native American tribes from the region, including the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, claimed the ancient man as their ancestor. They sought to rebury him with dignity under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, a federal law known as NAGPRA designed to return human remains and cultural items to their descendants. A group of 8 anthropologists, however, filed a lawsuit to block the repatriation. They argued that the skeleton was too old and its features too different to be culturally affiliated with any modern tribe, and that the opportunity for scientific study was paramount. What followed was a bitter 8-year legal war, a battle over the very definition of ancestry and who had the right to speak for the deep past. The court eventually ruled in favor of the scientists, leading to a lengthy and detailed study of the bones. Yet, even as the studies were published, the ethical unease only grew. Was this a triumph of open inquiry or a violation of a people's most sacred beliefs? The ultimate answer would not come from a courtroom or a measuring caliper, but from a tiny fragment of bone. Advances in genetic sequencing finally made it possible to extract analyzable DNA from the ancient skeleton. The results, published in 2015, were definitive. Kennewick man's genetic ancestry was unequivocally Native American. He was most closely related to the very tribes who had fought for decades to reclaim him, specifically the Colville people. The scientific data confirmed what oral tradition had asserted all along, a continuous, unbroken connection to the land stretching back millennia. The debate was over. In early 2017, his remains were finally transferred to a coalition of Columbia River tribes. In a private ceremony, 9,000 years after his death, the Ancient One was laid to rest. His long journey home stands as a profound lesson in the complex relationship between different ways of knowing the past, a reminder that the quest for knowledge must always be balanced with respect for the living. On a remote island in the vast Pacific, another profound mystery is carved into wood. The Rongorongo script of Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, remains one of the last great undeciphered writing systems in the world. Its glyphs are a beautiful and baffling parade of forms, from stylized human figures and birds to fantastical creatures and geometric shapes, all carefully incised into wooden tablets in a unique reverse Boustrophedon style. This means the lines of text do not run in a single direction, but instead every other line is written upside down, so you must physically rotate the tablet to read the next line. Only a few dozen of these precious artifacts survive, most discovered in the 19th century, and not a single islander at that time could recall how to read them. The meaning had been utterly lost, so what are we looking at when we study these intricate carvings? Some researchers propose it is a form of proto-writing, a system that blends pictorial symbols with more abstract signs to record genealogies, calendars, or creation myths. Others argue it might be a sophisticated mnemonic device, not a true writing system with a direct phonetic component, but a set of prompts to help trained priests recall and recite long, sacred chants and oral histories from memory. The most tantalizing theory is that Rongorongo is a full logographic script where each symbol represents a whole word or concept, a complete and complex language set in wood. The tragedy is that the key to this puzzle was almost certainly destroyed in a single, brutal generation. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders descended on the island, carrying off nearly half the population, including the paramount chief and his sons, who were most likely the literate elite, the keepers of the sacred knowledge. When international pressure forced Peru to repatriate the survivors, they returned carrying smallpox and tuberculosis, which then ravaged the remaining population. The social and religious structures collapsed completely, and with them, the ability to understand the wooden tablets. The very people who could have taught us how to read the script were gone. Today, the quest to understand Rongo continues with 21st century tools. Linguists and computer scientists are employing complex algorithms to search for patterns, comparing the sequences of glyphs to linguistic structures found in other Polynesian languages. They scan the tablets in high resolution, looking for microscopic marks that might offer clues. It is a race against time as the fragile wood continues to deteriorate. Cracking this code would be more than just an academic triumph. It would be like opening a window directly into the mind of pre-colonial Rapa Nui, allowing the island's own voice, its true history and beliefs, to finally speak for itself after centuries of silence. Deep within a quiet Oklahoma valley, the Spiro Mounds held a secret that would redefine the American Southeast. For centuries, these earthen mounds stood as silent, grassy bumps, their true significance lost to time. Then, in the 1930s, a group of relic hunters tunneled into the largest mound and broke into a hollow chamber. What they found inside was not merely a tomb, but a sealed treasury of unparalleled riches, a collection so vast it became known as the Great Mortuary. The chamber was a breathtaking hoard of sacred power, filled with artifacts crafted from materials gathered from across the continent. There were intricately carved shell gorgets depicting supernatural beings, effigy pipes of stone showing otherworldly birds, and sheets of embossed copper that shimmered like captured sunlight. They uncovered axes made of gleaming galena, blankets woven from thousands of iridescent feathers, and robes adorned with pearls from the Mississippi River. This was not a simple burial, but the deliberate interment of an entire belief system, representing one of the most spectacular pre-Columbian archaeological discoveries ever made in North America. The treasures of Spiro pointed to something far larger than a single chiefdom. They were the physical heart of what archaeologists once called the Southern Cult, now more accurately known as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. This was not a cult in the modern sense, but a vast, shared religious movement, a common visual language of symbols that connected societies from Oklahoma to Florida and from Wisconsin to Georgia. The artifacts from Spiro are a catalogue of this shared ideology. They repeatedly feature a core set of powerful images: the weeping eye, the forked eye, the cross and circle, and the ubiquitous falcon warrior, often shown holding a severed head. But what did this symbolic language actually mean? Were these the regalia of a widespread warrior priesthood, a class of elites who derived their authority from a common set of divine heroes and creation stories? The imagery is undeniably focused on themes of warfare, death, and world renewal, suggesting a belief system where ritualized conflict was necessary to maintain the cosmic order, much like the Maya concept of feeding the gods. The existence of this complex hints at a continent-spanning network of trade and ideology. The seashells used for gorgets came from the Gulf of Mexico, the copper from the Great Lakes, the mica from the Appalachian Mountains, and the flint from distant quarries. These materials did not just travel as simple trade goods, they moved as sacred items, passed along exchange routes that were also pathways for priests, warriors, and ideas. A chief in Oklahoma could wear a symbol carved from a Gulf Coast shell that would be instantly recognized and respected by a leader in Tennessee. This shared symbolic system likely helped facilitate diplomacy, create alliances, and legitimize the power of emerging elites across a vast and varied landscape. The mystery of the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex is not in the objects themselves, but in the invisible web of connection they represent. A spiritual and economic network that bound ancient North America together centuries before European contact, only to fade away, leaving its magnificent code written in shell, copper, and stone. High on the mist-shrouded slopes of Columbia's Sierra Nevada, a lost world clings to the mountainside. This is Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City, a breathtaking testament to the Tairona civilization, a people who defied gravity itself. They were master engineers who transformed one of the world's most rugged landscapes into a terraced metropolis of stone, a city that seems to grow directly from the jungle. To reach its heart, you must walk the same stone-paved paths they laid centuries ago, a labyrinth of stairs and terraces weaving through the dense canopy. The city is not a single structure, but a vast network of over 200 circular stone plazas, each one leveled perfectly on the precipitous slopes. These plazas are connected by a web of cobbled pathways and hundreds of stone steps, a monumental staircase system that ascends and descends the mountain ridges. Imagine the effort of hauling countless stones to build this vertical kingdom, all without the use of pack animals or the wheel. This was a society organized with incredible precision, capable of moving mountains, basket by basket, to create their sacred home. The city thrived for centuries, a bustling center of trade and ceremony, until the Spanish conquest arrived on the coast. While the Tairona were never fully subdued by the conquistadors, the introduction of old-world diseases and the relentless pressure of conflict eventually forced them to abandon their stone city around the end of the 16th century. The jungle quickly moved in, swallowing the plazas and stairs, guarding its secret for nearly 400 years. It was only in the 1970s that treasure hunters, following local legends, stumbled upon the overgrown stonework, leading to the official rediscovery of this magnificent site. But the story of the Tairona did not end with the abandonment of their city. Their direct descendants, the Kogi people, still live in the high reaches of the Sierra Nevada today. They call themselves the elder brothers of humanity, and they see their sacred duty as maintaining the balance of the natural world. For the Kogi, the entire mountain range is a living entity, a microcosm of the planet, and every river, stone, and forest has a spiritual life. They emerged from their secluded villages in the late 20th century to deliver a solemn warning to the younger brothers, which is their term for the rest of humanity. They warned that our relentless exploitation of the Earth's resources, our digging for coal and oil, was causing the great Mother Earth to sicken and die. They see the melting glaciers on their sacred peaks and the shifting weather patterns as direct symptoms of this global illness. The silent, stone testimony of Ciudad Perdida and the urgent, living voice of the Kogi are two parts of the same story, a reminder that some mysteries are not just about the past but carry a crucial message for our future. Etched onto the sun-baked sandstone walls of Sigo Canyon are figures that seem to defy time. With oversized, hollow eyes and simplified bodies, these ancient paintings have become a canvas for one of the most persistent modern myths, the idea that they depict ancient astronauts visiting Earth. This theory, popularized in the 1970s, invites us to see these beings not as products of human imagination, but as literal portraits of extraterrestrial visitors. It is a compelling sci-fi narrative, but it fundamentally misreads the spiritual landscape of the ancestral Puebloan world. To understand these haunting images, we must step away from the spaceship and into the shaman's tent. Across the Southwest, rock art is filled with anthropomorphic figures that blend human and animal traits. These are not aliens, but powerful spirit beings, ancestors, or deities from a deep and complex cosmology. The large, staring eyes, so often cited as proof of otherworldly visitors, are a classic artistic convention representing a trance state. In shamanic traditions, entering a ritual trance was understood as a journey into the spirit world, a process often induced by fasting, rhythmic drumming, or the use of sacred plants. The visionary experiences that resulted were depicted as encounters with these very beings. The so-called astronauts of Sigo Canyon are far more likely to be representations of the shaman themselves in a state of spiritual transformation, or the powerful, sometimes terrifying, spirit guides they met on their journeys. This misinterpretation is not a harmless flight of fancy. When we project our own science fiction fantasies onto these panels, we engage in a form of intellectual colonialism. We effectively silence the rich, indigenous voices and cultural contexts that give these images their true meaning. the real mystery is not what alien technology they might represent, but what profound spiritual message they were intended to convey. Were they prayers for rain, records of a vision quest, or maps of the cosmos? These questions require patient, respectful scholarship and collaboration with descendant communities, not sensationalist leaps. The allure of the ancient astronaut theory lies in its simplicity, offering a single, dramatic explanation for humanity's past. The truth, as always, is far more intricate and human. It is a story of artists and holy people trying to capture the ineffable, to give form to the powerful forces that shaped their world. The walls of Sego Canyon do not tell a story of visitors from the stars, but a deeply human story of the search for meaning in a vast and mysterious universe. Fire was the weapon that erased a library of an entire hemisphere. In the decades following the Spanish conquest of Mexico, a systematic campaign of cultural annihilation unfolded, led by zealous missionaries determined to extinguish indigenous beliefs. The most infamous of these figures was Friar Diego de Landa. In a single catastrophic act in the Yucatan in 1562, he oversaw the burning of thousands of Maya codices, those precious folded books made of fig bark paper. He described them as containing nothing but superstition and lies of the devil. But in those flames vanished the detailed records of Maya astronomy, history, poetry, and sacred knowledge, a loss so profound it is almost impossible to calculate. Landa himself would later write a detailed account of Maya culture, a contradictory act that preserved some knowledge even as he had destroyed its primary sources. Only a handful of these pre-Columbian books escaped the fires. The most famous is the Dresden Codex, a stunningly complex document that reads like an ancient astronomer's almanac. Its pages contain precise Venus tables, eclipse predictions, and intricate calendars that charted time with a sophistication that rivaled anything in the Old World. Another survivor, the Florentine Codex, was created under Spanish rule but written and illustrated by Aztec scribes. It is an encyclopedic work of unparalleled scope, documenting everything from the philosophy of their gods and the routines of daily life to the natural history of the Valley of Mexico and the chilling, first-hand accounts of the conquest itself. It is a record filtered through trauma, but it is a voice that survived. Today, the quest to recover this lost world continues not with shovels, but with spectral imaging and complex algorithms. Researchers use high-tech multispectral scanners to peer through the layers of time. Some codices were scraped and reused as palimpsests, their original texts painted over by later colonial writers. These advanced techniques can sometimes detect the ghostly traces of the older, underlying indigenous text, allowing scholars to digitally peel back the colonial layer and read the original words for the first time in centuries. The painstaking work of decipherment continues, glyph by glyph, slowly returning voice to the silent pages. The true tragedy lies in the sheer scale of the void. We are left to wonder about the epic poems, the philosophical treatises, the detailed histories of kings and queens, and the accumulated scientific observations that turn to ash. Each burned codex was a universe of thought, a unique perspective on what it meant to be human. The gaps in our understanding are not merely academic, they are a permanent tear in the fabric of human history, a reminder of how much was lost in the clash of two worlds and how precious the surviving fragments truly are. Buried in a Tennessee mound in 1889, a small stone tablet seemed to whisper a secret that defied history. Known as the Bat Creek Stone, this unassuming artifact was unearthed from an ancient burial site by a team from the Smithsonian Institution. At first glance, the crude inscription appeared to be little more than random scratches. Decades later, however, a startling claim emerged. A researcher asserted that the characters were not random at all, but ancient Paleo-Hebrew, a script used in the Middle East over 2,000 years ago. Even more astonishingly, he proposed the inscription spelled out the phrase for Judah. If authentic, this little stone would be monumental proof of transatlantic contact, suggesting that Semitic explorers had reached the heart of North America long before Columbus or the Vikings. The implications were staggering, pointing to a world far more interconnected in antiquity than anyone had believed. This diffusionist theory, the idea that cultures spread through contact rather than developing in isolation, holds a powerful allure. It simplifies the complex tapestry of human history, offering neat, dramatic connections across vast oceans. The Bat Creek stone became a perfect vessel for this desire, a tantalizing clue that seemed to rewrite the narrative of the entire continent. It suggested a lost chapter where Israelite travelers might have interacted with the indigenous mound builders of North America, a story ripped from an adventure novel. The stone's champions argued that its context within a dated burial mound proved its antiquity, placing it firmly in the pre-Columbian era. For a time, the mystery seemed tantalizingly real. Mainstream archaeology, however, responded with deep skepticism. The initial excavation in the late 19th century was part of a period riddled with problematic practices and outright hoaxes targeting the public's fascination with the mound builders. Upon closer scrutiny, the Bat Creek stone itself began to crumble as evidence. The most damning analysis came from a meticulous study of the inscription. Researchers discovered that the characters on the stone were not just similar to Paleo-Hebrew, they were a near-perfect mirror image. The inscription was reversed, as if someone had copied the letters directly from an illustration in a book without realizing the script should face the other way. The specific source was identified as a Masonic reference work, General Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, which contained an illustration of the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. This particular edition was published in 1871, a full 18 years before the stone was discovered. The evidence strongly pointed to a modern creation, a hoax likely perpetrated by the excavators themselves. The story of the Bat Creek stone serves as a crucial lesson in the rigorous standards required for authenticating any archaeological find. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and every aspect of an artifact's discovery, from the soil it was found in to the tools used to excavate it, must withstand intense scrutiny. In this case, the context was contaminated by the very people who unearthed it. The stone's journey from an intriguing mystery to a probable fraud highlights the constant battle in archaeology between captivating stories and verifiable facts. It reminds us that our yearning for a more connected ancient world can sometimes blind us to the simpler, more human truth that the past is complex enough without needing forgers to add their own mysterious chapters. A single chicken bone can rewrite history or at least rattle its foundations. This is the story of the pre-Columbian chicken, a seemingly humble clue that ignited one of the most captivating scientific controversies of our time. On the coast of Chile, at a site called El Arenal, archaeologists unearthed chicken bones that were radiocarbon dated to a period before 1420, decades before Christopher Columbus first set sail across the Atlantic. This discovery alone was startling because conventional history holds that chickens, an Old World species, were first introduced to the Americas by the Spanish. But the real bombshell came from genetic analysis. Initial DNA testing suggested these ancient Chilean chickens were not related to European breeds at all, but shared a distinct genetic signature with chickens from Polynesia. The implication was staggering. It pointed to a direct pre-Columbian voyage across the vast Pacific Ocean. Imagine Polynesian navigators, masters of reading stars and currents, completing the final leg of their epic eastern expansion, making landfall in South America and leaving behind their chickens as living proof of that incredible journey. For a moment, the map of the ancient world seemed to shrink, connected by the intrepid voyages of seafaring cultures. Yet science is a process of rigorous questioning, and the initial excitement soon met with intense scrutiny. Subsequent studies began to cast doubt on this revolutionary narrative. Other researchers attempted to replicate the DNA findings and encountered a major problem: potential contamination. The original bone samples had been handled extensively, and the risk of modern DNA, perhaps from a researcher or the environment, skewing the ancient genetic signal was a real possibility. Further, more comprehensive radiocarbon dating of the site and the bones themselves suggested a different timeline. Some of these new dates placed the chicken bones firmly in the post-Spanish era, indicating they might have burrowed down into older layers of the site through natural disturbances or the activity of other animals. The elegant story of transoceanic contact began to fray at the edges, challenged by the very tools that had first given it life. This back and forth is not a sign of scientific failure, but the very essence of how knowledge is built. The chicken bone debate exemplifies the self-correcting nature of good science, where every claim is subjected to a gauntlet of testing and replication. It highlights the immense difficulty of working with ancient, fragile evidence, where a single speck of modern dust can alter the story. The possibility of Polynesian contact with the Americas remains a fascinating and plausible hypothesis, supported by other tantalizing clues like the presence of the sweet potato, a South American crop in ancient Polynesia. The story of the El Arenal chickens is a powerful reminder that our understanding of the past is not set in stone. It is a living, breathing dialogue between discovery and doubt, where even the most compelling evidence must earn its place in history through relentless verification. High in the cloud forests of northern Peru, a people of legend built their fortress homes among the mist. They were the Chachapoya, the warriors of the clouds, a culture as proud as they were mysterious. Their greatest testament is the citadel of Cuelap, a stone city perched on a mountain ridge more than 10,000 feet above sea level. Encircling the entire settlement is a colossal wall, 60 feet high in places, a formidable barrier of limestone blocks that seems to grow directly from the mountain itself. Within these massive defenses lie the ruins of over 400 circular stone houses, their smooth, rounded walls hinting at a unique architectural vision. Walking through the main gateway, a narrow, funneled corridor designed to expose any attacker, you enter a world suspended between earth and sky, perpetually veiled in a cool, damp fog that obscures the depths of the surrounding Utcubamba Valley. This was not just a settlement, it was a statement of power and independence carved into the precipice. The origins of the Chachapoya people are a profound enigma. Their language is lost and their own story was never written by their hand. Almost everything we know about them comes from the chronicles of their conquerors, the Inca, who described them as fierce warriors and noted with some surprise that they were unusually tall and fair-skinned. These physical descriptions have fueled endless speculation about potential transoceanic contacts in the deep past, though genetic studies suggest a predominantly Amazonian origin. What is clear is that for centuries they thrived in this rugged, isolated territory, developing a culture distinct from the Inca to the south and the Amazonian tribes to the east. Their independence, however, would eventually draw the attention of an expanding empire. In the late 15th century, the Inca war machine turned its gaze toward the cloud forests. The Chachapoya resisted with a tenacity that earned them lasting fame, but the overwhelming force of the Inca eventually subjugated them. Even in defeat, their spirit of rebellion did not break. They later allied with the Spanish conquistadors in a failed bid to overthrow their Inca overlords, a decision that ultimately led to their tragic demise from introduced diseases and the brutal realities of colonial rule. The Cloud Warriors maintained a unique relationship with their dead, one that defied the very mountains they called home. On sheer cliff faces overlooking their territories, they placed their most prominent nobles and priests in Puran machos or sarcophagi that stand like silent sentinels. These burial pods are large, anthropomorphic figures sculpted from clay and wood, each one an individual statue with a distinct face and headdress staring out across the abyss. Reaching these tombs was a feat in itself, requiring incredible skill and courage to scale the cliffs for placement and subsequent rituals. This practice was more than just burial, it was a powerful act of remembrance and territorial claim. By placing their honored dead in these inaccessible, highly visible shrines, the Chachapoya ensured their ancestors remained a literal and figurative part of the landscape, eternally watching over the living and the lands they fought so hard to protect. Modern archaeology is finally beginning to let the Chachapoya speak for themselves, cutting through the biased accounts of their enemies. Excavations at sites like Cuelap and the Lagoon of the Condors, where a trove of mummies and artifacts was discovered in a secluded cliffside mausoleum, are revealing a complex society. They were skilled weavers, accomplished farmers who terraced the steep slopes, and traders connected to networks spanning the Andes and the Amazon. Their artwork depicts powerful shamans and jaguar spirits, hinting at a rich spiritual world centered on the forces of nature that surrounded them. Each new discovery peels back another layer of mist, not just from their mountain citadels, but from their forgotten story, restoring voice to a people who defined themselves not by the empires that sought to conquer them, but by the clouds they chose to call home. The true legacy of these ancient worlds is not confined to silent ruins or museum cases. It lives and breathes all around us, woven into the very fabric of our modern lives. For centuries, the narrative of the Americas before Columbus was one of emptiness, of simple tribes scattered across a virgin wilderness. We now know this to be a profound and damaging myth. The hemisphere was, in fact, a vibrant tapestry of countless nations, each with its own genius, its own solutions to the challenges of existence. This was not one story, but a million stories of innovation and resilience. Their intellectual contributions alone are staggering. The Maya concept of zero was a mathematical leap that empowered complex calculations. Their astronomical observations were so precise they could predict planetary cycles across vast stretches of time. The Inca engineered a bureaucracy without a written word, using knotted strings to manage an empire larger than Rome. These were not primitive cultures, but sophisticated societies whose knowledge was vast and deeply practical. Perhaps their most tangible gift to the world is on our plates. Imagine Italian cuisine without tomatoes, Irish history without the potato, or a summer barbecue without corn on the cob. These staples, now global, are all pre-Columbian domestications. The civilizations we have explored were master geneticists, patiently cultivating wild grasses and roots into the crops that would one day fuel the entire planet. This agricultural revolution, born in American soil, fundamentally altered the course of human history and demography. The silent stones of their cities also speak an urgent language to our present moment. The collapses of the Maya, the Moche, and Cahokia were not random tragedies. They were, in many cases, cautionary tales of societies pushed beyond their environmental limits. They teach us about the fragility of complex systems, the dangers of rampant deforestation, and the catastrophic impact of prolonged drought. When we look at the abandoned plazas of the Maya or the melted adobe of the Moche, we are not looking at a distant, irrelevant past. We are looking at a powerful reflection of our own potential future, a stark reminder that no civilization, no matter how brilliant, is immune to the forces of nature it depends upon. Most importantly, this story does not end in collapse. The people did not vanish. From the Quechua-speaking descendants of the Inca in the Andes to the Maya weavers in Guatemala and the countless tribal nations across North America, indigenous cultures are not relics. They are living, dynamic communities engaged in a powerful resurgence, reclaiming languages, revitalizing traditions, and asserting their vital role in the modern world. They are the enduring heirs of this deep history, the keepers of knowledge that has weathered millennia. The great mystery of pre-Columbian America is no longer just about what was lost, but about what has survived, what has been returned to the light, and what these ancient voices can still teach us about building a future in balance with our world. Our journey through these lost worlds reveals a history far richer than any single story could contain. We have walked the silent plazas of Teotihuacán, traced the celestial calendars of the Maya, and marveled at the impossible stonework of the Inca. We have seen civilizations rise to breathtaking heights of art and engineering, only to be tested by climate, conflict, and the fragile bonds of their own societies. From the colossal heads of the Olmec to the geometric ghosts in the Amazon, each discovery peels back another layer, proving that the ancient Americas were a thriving, dynamic hemisphere of innovation. These are not just tales of collapse and mystery, but of profound human ingenuity. The story is never truly finished. Every new scan of a jungle floor, every fresh reading of a genetic sequence adds another piece to this magnificent, sprawling puzzle. Our understanding of this deep past is constantly being rewritten, reminding us that history is not a closed book but an ongoing excavation. So we turn to you now as fellow explorers of these secrets. Which of these ancient enigmas captured your imagination the most? Was it the haunting abandonment of the great houses at Choco Canyon, the silent plea of the Nazca Lines, or the living legacy of the Cloud Warriors? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you are hungry for more journeys into the hidden corners of our past, be sure to subscribe. The puzzle is vast, and there are countless pieces still waiting to be found.